Simon Cowell, a name now etched into the very fabric of modern entertainment. A man whose mere glance could ignite dreams or extinguish them. To millions, he is the ruthless voice behind the world's most iconic talent shows, the force who propelled unknowns into stardom. But to understand who Simon Cowell is today, we must journey back to a time when he was no one, when his voice was lost in silence, when the spotlight was a distant fantasy and affection, something perpetually out of reach. A former ballet dancer and high society figure, exuded poise and charm in public, yet maintained a painful emotional distance from her children. His father, Eric Cowell, a music industry executive and real estate developer, believed in structure and results, not tenderness. He measured worth in achievements, not affection. This left Simon yearning, starving for acknowledgement. He would later recall a haunting truth, that his father never once told him, "I'm proud of you." For most people, such words might be dismissed as a trivial loss. For Simon, they were the source of a deep, abiding emptiness that would shape his entire being. That absence of approval didn't just hurt, it haunted him. School offered little respite. At Radlett Preparatory School, then Dover College, Simon didn't stand out for excellence. He wasn't the brilliant star his parents may have hoped for. Instead, he was a rebel, clashing with teachers, refusing to conform, constantly struggling under the pressure of expectations he never felt capable of meeting. While other students were celebrated, he remained on the fringes, present, but invisible. When he graduated with only a GCE in English and sociology, it wasn't a triumph. It was a reminder that he had once again failed to become what others wanted him to be. By his late teens, rejection had already begun to tattoo itself onto his identity. It came not in dramatic moments, but in 1,000 little cuts: a father's silence, a teacher's disappointment, a peer's indifference. His father, perhaps sensing his son's aimlessness, pulled some strings and placed him in the mailroom at EMI Music. To some, this was a foot in the door. To Simon, it was a daily reminder of everything he wasn't. Every morning, he delivered coffee to executives who never remembered his name. He sorted fan mail for stars who didn't know he existed. The glamour of the music world was all around him, and yet he felt like a ghost in it. Simon would later recall crying silently in the office bathrooms after work, consumed by the fear that this was it, that his life had already peaked before it had even begun. He walked out of EMI, humiliated and ashamed, only to return again, because the world outside offered even colder rejections. And yet, within that darkness, a different kind of spark began to flicker. The boy who had been overlooked, dismissed, and made to feel invisible began to harden. The silence of his early years, the neglect, the shame, all began to morph into a quiet but ferocious determination. He was no longer begging to be noticed. He was preparing to force the world to look. Every ignored gesture, every denied embrace had built inside him a hunger that no ordinary dream could satisfy. He wasn't just looking for success. He was chasing validation, redemption. And so, Simon returned to EMI, not with hope, but with grit. In those long hours, handling records and sorting mail, he began studying the mechanics of the music business. He watched how fame was manufactured, how stars were molded. He paid attention to what made people listen. This wasn't a glamorous start. It was grueling, thankless, and lonely. But from these ashes, he began to sketch the outline of something greater. By the early 1980s, Simon took his first real gamble. He launched his own label, Fanfare Records. At first, it felt like everything he had waited for was finally arriving. Tracks like So Macho by Sanita became massive pop hits. Simon, who had once been laughed out of offices, was now shaking hands at parties, clinking glasses with celebrities, basking in the glow of overnight success. But success, as he would learn again and again, was not a fortress. It was a mirage. Within a few short years, the glitter faded. Trends shifted. Fanfare collapsed. Its contracts turned worthless, and Simon was left with nothing, not even his pride. In his early 30s, he found himself moving back into his parents' house. The same bedroom where he once cried quietly into the night now welcomed him back like a cruel echo. To the world, it was a failed venture. To Simon, it was a soul-crushing defeat. It felt like confirmation that the boy who had always been told he wasn't enough never would be. Years later, he would describe that time with heartbreaking clarity. It nearly broke me. He became a ghost in his own life, floating through the days, haunted by every opportunity lost, every humiliation endured. And yet, in that desolate silence, something extraordinary began to take shape. Because Simon Cowell didn't give up. He began to ask a different question, not what do critics love, but what do ordinary people feel? He started seeing music not as art for insiders, but as a language for the masses. His focus shifted. He no longer sought the respect of purists. He wanted to build connections, audiences, not awards. And this shift in philosophy would soon change everything. Simon Cowell's path back into the music industry was not paved with celebration. It was paved with desperation. When he re-entered the scene in the early 1990s through BMG, he wasn't hailed as a visionary. He was a man marked by bankruptcy, returning like a cautionary tale. Every hallway whisper, every glance, reminded him of his public failure. He wasn't welcomed. He was tolerated. But this time, Simon carried a weapon far more powerful than naivety. Insight forged in the fires of disappointment. He understood something most executives ignored. That perfection didn't sell records. Emotion did. Connection did. He stopped chasing what critics praised and began delivering what everyday listeners wanted. Ballads, boy bands, melody over message. And he didn't care if it was labeled cheap, as long as people were listening. He signed acts that industry veterans scoffed at, groups like Five, duos like Robson and Jerome, and ultimately, Westlife. Journalists rolled their eyes. Music snobs shook their heads. But the public bought millions of albums. And each unit sold wasn't just a financial win, it was a statement. A message that Simon Cowell had learned how to speak the language of mass culture better than anyone else. Still, the victories were hard-won. The past never truly left him. The fear of failure followed him into every boardroom. He admitted later that, during these years, he would lie awake at night terrified that everything could collapse again, that he would once again return to silence, to invisibility. And then everything changed. The year was 2001. The project was Pop Idol. For the first time, Simon stepped out from behind the scenes and into the public eye. A man known for backroom deals and talent signings was now seated under harsh studio lights, judging nervous contestants with a glare that could pierce glass. Many doubted him. He wasn't charming. He wasn't nurturing. His tone was blunt. His criticism cut deep. But where others saw cruelty, the public saw truth. Viewers were captivated. Pop Idol became a sensation, and Simon Cowell's name and face became cultural currency. No longer was he the quiet architect behind hits. He was the main event. His sarcastic comments, his ability to say what others wouldn't, and his refusal to fake kindness turned him into an unexpected icon. His honesty didn't alienate, it resonated. The transformation was radical. The man who had once cried in silence now had the entire country hanging on his every word. His approval could build careers. His disapproval could destroy dreams. With each week, Simon wasn't just reviewing talent. He was redefining entertainment. And as Pop Idol crossed the Atlantic in 2002 to become American Idol, the metamorphosis was complete. Simon Cowell wasn't just a figure in British television. He became a global phenomenon. Millions tuned in not only to discover new voices, but to witness what Simon would say next. His raised eyebrow, his pause before delivering a brutal truth, his sighs of disappointment. These became as iconic as the songs themselves. In a matter of months, he had gone from bankruptcy to dominance. His words shaped careers. His glare sparked headlines. He was loved. He was hated. But above all, he was powerful. By the mid-2000s, this solitude wasn't new. It had roots in childhood. It had simply evolved. The boy once overlooked had become a man haunted by applause that couldn't fill the silence he carried inside. Still, the empire grew. He created stars. He launched careers. He forged one of the most successful entertainment legacies in modern history. And then, just as the world crowned him king, everything changed. Because in 2013, Simon Cowell, the man who had always controlled every narrative, suddenly lost control of his own. By 2013, Simon Cowell was at the summit of power. A single revelation fractured the polished image he had so carefully constructed. The headlines came fast, unforgiving, and impossible to escape. Simon Cowell was going to be a father. Not by choice, not by plan, and not under circumstances the public would celebrate. The mother was Lauren Silverman, the wife of one of Simon's close friends, Andrew Silverman. What might have passed as a salacious rumor became an unstoppable firestorm. Overnight, Simon was no longer the masterful judge, but the judged. The scandal dominated every tabloid, every headline, every television segment. It wasn't just a story, it was a spectacle. The man who had defined so many reputations found his own under public trial. But behind the headlines was a deeper, more painful reality. Simon wasn't merely battling criticism. He was facing betrayal, guilt, and the implosion of a carefully controlled existence. Friends he had known for decades stopped calling. Business partners created distance. Whispers followed him into every room. The scrutiny was merciless. The judgment relentless. And worst of all, it wasn't something he could fix with charm or power. Andrew Silverman filed for divorce, citing betrayal. And Simon, so often the architect of other people's stories, had no control over this one. The public discourse was brutal. There was no defense, no spin that could redeem the situation in the court of popular opinion. Simon later admitted in a rare moment of vulnerable honesty, "It was not something I'm proud of." There were no excuses, no rationalizations, just the quiet, heavy tone of regret. But from this scandal, from this personal earthquake, came something no one expected. A turning point, a moment that, rather than destroy him, would transform him. In February 2014, his son, Eric, was born, and everything changed. The cameras captured the moment. Simon holding Eric in his arms, a smile softening his famously stern face. But the cameras could never capture what that little boy meant to him. Eric wasn't just a child. He was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the middle of destruction, something beautiful could emerge. That legacy wasn't built solely on ratings and fame, but on love, forgiveness, and beginnings. The ruthless mogul who once barked commands in meeting rooms began reading children's books by lamplight. He traded red carpets for Lego sets. Instead of jetting between productions, he scheduled his days around bath time and bedtime. The transformation wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, private, and deeply real. Simon would later confess, "My priorities changed completely. My world wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about him." Those closest to him noticed the shift immediately. He became softer, slower, more present. The man who once powered through sleepless nights for business began pausing to watch cartoons with his son. For the first time in decades, Simon Cowell stopped chasing something. He started being. One close associate would recall, fatherhood saved him. He was on a dark path even before the scandal. Eric gave him a reason to heal. But healing didn't come without pain. Though the birth of Eric brought joy, the damage of the scandal lingered like a bruise beneath the surface. Relationships had been fractured, trust had been destroyed, and no amount of lullabies could rewrite what had already happened. Simon knew that. He carried the regret openly, acknowledging that his mistakes had consequences no camera could edit out. "It was a scar," he once said, "but it was a scar that reshaped me." For a man so used to managing his image, this was a pivotal moment. Because the redemption didn't come from denying the scandal. It came from accepting it, from allowing it to change him. The man once known for control learned to surrender. To fatherhood, to humility, to the messy, painful work of becoming better. Eric gave Simon something that decades of success never could: peace. But just as he began to find that peace, life dealt him another unimaginable blow. In 2015, while producing The X Factor, Simon's mother, Julie Brett, passed away at the age of 89. To the outside world, it may have seemed like a natural loss, a woman passing gracefully after a long life. But to Simon, it was shattering. Julie had been the quiet anchor throughout his chaotic childhood, the one presence he had always longed to impress. Her passing didn't just mark the end of a maternal relationship. It severed the last connection to a past Simon had spent his whole life running from, yet always trying to reconcile with. He canceled commitments, stepped away from the spotlight, and for a moment, the man who had built his world on schedules, productions, and ratings simply grieved. But the pain of losing his mother was made heavier by the wound that came years earlier, the death of his father in 1999. Eric Cowell had never seen his sons rise from bankruptcy to stardom. Simon had long carried that regret silently, that the man he had always tried to please never witnessed the success built from his approval. Now, with both parents gone, Simon felt untethered. The last thread to his origins had been cut, and despite the wealth, the fame, and the global empire, he felt like a child again. Lost. Alone. He admitted, "Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. No spotlight, no deal, no acclaim could fill that absence." And yet, life once again handed him both darkness and light in the same season. Just a year earlier, he had become a father. Now, that role took on even deeper meaning. Because in Eric, Simon found more than a son. He found a chance to give what he had never received. The tenderness, the support, the presence. He became fiercely protective of that time. Each laugh with Eric, each story at bedtime wasn't just a moment. It was a gift, a way of saying what had never been said to him. You are enough. But the journey of healing was far from over. Because in 2020, as Simon was beginning to settle into a life of slower rhythms, life struck again, not with scandal, but with violence. This time, it wasn't emotional. It was physical, and it nearly killed him. In August 2020, just as Simon Cowell was beginning to embrace a slower, more grounded rhythm of life, anchored by fatherhood and softened by time, fate delivered a blow more ruthless than any tabloid headline. At 60 years old, the man who had once strutted across stages in sharp suits now lay motionless on the pavement, stripped of all control, gasping in agony, unsure if he would ever walk again. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, existential. His body was failing, but what frightened him most wasn't the discomfort. It was the possibility that he might never again be able to hold his son without wires, scars, or support. Eric, then just 6 years old, became the reason Simon clung to hope. I thought of Eric. It wasn't his body that was broken this time. It was something deeper, something that would leave no scars the world could see, but ones he would carry quietly for the rest of his life. On a quiet morning, the world woke to unthinkable news. Liam Payne, former member of One Direction, was gone. Only 31 years old. His life cut short by a tragic fall from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires. The headlines read like fiction, but the shock was unbearably real. For the world, it was the death of a pop icon. For Simon Cowell, it was the loss of someone he considered family. Liam hadn't just been another contestant. He was one of the boys Simon had carefully handpicked, mentored. A piece of that creation was gone. Not to retirement, not to scandal, but to death. Permanent, irrevocable. And so Simon did what he had never quite done before. He let go. He stopped chasing, slowed his production schedule, said no to projects he once would have clung to, and started saying yes to quiet mornings, to family dinners, to the vulnerable, unseen parts of life that fame often erases. He clung to Eric, not just as a son, but as a compass, because after all the years of building an empire, Simon Cowell had finally begun to understand that an empire built without love, without presence, was just a monument to emptiness. And so, Liam's death, while unspeakably tragic, became a turning point, a final mirror, one Simon could not look away from. The man once obsessed with shaping other people's futures finally began tending to his own. As Simon Cowell stepped into his mid-60s, he was no longer the firebrand who built reality TV with sharp critiques and sharper suits. He had become something more complicated, more human. 5 million Beverly Hills mansion, once a statement of success, has become a place of recovery. A sanctuary where every morning begins not with meetings, but with pain management, with slow, deliberate Pilates prescribed by therapists who understand how fragile his spine remains. The injury from 2020 still lingers, a quiet enemy that reemerges each time he moves too quickly, bends too far, or simply tries to rest. Every morning, stiffness greets him before the sunlight does. And so, every motion becomes an act of mindfulness. Meals, once indulgent, are now engineered with precision. Low sodium for his blood pressure, high fiber to keep inflammation at bay, antioxidants to combat fatigue. Every bite feels like a choice between healing or hurting, he once told a close friend. Gone are the feasts. In their place, quiet discipline. But if his back is a daily burden, his eyes are the deeper wound. Decades spent under stage lights, coupled with the trauma of his physical injuries, have taken their toll. His vision is fading. He now needs reading glasses constantly. Dim rooms leave him squinting. And more than anything, he fears the day when he can no longer see his son Eric's face clearly. He confessed that quietly, once, that nothing, not the pain, not the accidents, not even the loss of fame, frightens him more than losing sight of the boy who saved him. It's a fear no camera will ever capture, but it's real, and it shapes every choice he makes now. Because the physical pain is just one layer. The deeper trials live in his mind. Sleepless nights, anxiety, and the quiet hum of dread. Simon's personal fortune now exceeds $600 million. He owns properties across continents, a $24 million beachfront home in Malibu, a $45 million estate in London's Holland Park, a Manhattan penthouse gazing over Central Park. In his garage, more than 20 supercars, Ferraris, Rolls-Royces, Aston Martins, a Bugatti Veyron. But they mostly sit in silence now. Their engine's cold, because Simon Cowell, once in constant motion, has finally begun to slow down. Even his private jet, once a shuttle between auditions and global meetings, now collects dust more than flight hours. The symbols of ambition remain, but their meaning has changed. They're no longer tools of conquest. They are remnants of a race he no longer runs. The money will go to foundations that support children's health, creative education, and scholarships for those who start life with nothing, just like he once did. I don't want Eric to inherit money, Simon said in a recent interview. I want him to inherit values. That one line, more than any episode, any soundbite. The fillers have faded. His features, once frozen by the fear of aging, now carry the quiet dignity of surrender. I've stopped chasing youth, he said. I'd rather chase memories with Eric. The world that once mocked his appearance now sees something deeper, authenticity. Each wrinkle tells of survival. Each gray hair, a chapter earned. The once invincible mogul now wears his age with something far more powerful than pride, peace. But this peace is not without pain. There are still difficult mornings. Still nights when sleep evades him. Still tremors of fear when he walks downstairs too quickly. The price of survival is a body that will never be quite the same. But for Simon, the trade was worth it, because in surviving, he found clarity. His current projects are no longer about expanding his empire. They're about giving back. Charity concerts. Simon Cowell, the man who once turned nobodies into stars, has finally found the star that matters most in his own life. Not on stage, but sitting beside him, laughing, growing, and calling him something no audience ever could. Dad,